Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for testifying today to discuss the devastating cost the situation at our southern border is having on communities across the country. The issue at our southern border is complex, but one aspect that demands urgent attention is the influx of illicit drugs, particularly fentanyl. I've heard countless times from communities and law enforcement in my district about the devastating rise of this drug and the cost it has on individual safety, law enforcement, and public health. I want to start by going over a few statistics. In 2020, more than 5,000 Californians lost their lives due to opioid overdose, and 80% of those deaths were directly attributed to fentanyl. In 2021, fentanyl-related overdose deaths surged by 54%. Last year, California seized a record amount of fentanyl, 62,000 pounds, enough to kill the global population twice over. These alarming increases in seizures and over 1,000% increase since 2021 underscores the severity of the crisis. As we discuss the cost that the open southern border has had on our local law enforcement who are on the front lines of this crisis, we need to remember that these statistics represent lives lost, families shattered, and communities in distress. Our nation's officers deserve our unwavering support as they grapple with this crisis, allocating precious time and resources to combat fentanyl while striving to keep our neighborhoods safe. Responding to overdose calls, investigating drug trafficking, ensuring the public is safe from drug-related crimes and violence demand significant resources and stretch our local agencies very thin. These are resources that could otherwise be allocated to community policing, crime prevention, enhancing emergency services. It is our duty to combat this crisis with every tool at our disposal. So I want to thank you all again for taking the time to discuss this significant issue. But I want to direct my question directly to Mr. Smith and Mr. Blair. Can both of you touch on the cost that illegal drug flow from the southern border continues to place on our local law enforcement and communities?
Unfortunately, because we're dealing with mass amounts of illegal immigration at the southern border, most of our assets, to include resources, are now geared towards that. So a lot of the apprehensions, unfortunately, when it comes to narcotics and everything else, is happening with the Texas DPS or local law enforcement, maybe that's on Operation Stone Garden or whatnot. So unfortunately, the local law enforcement is now having to deal with Mexican cartels or foreign terrorist organizations while the federal government is facilitating the invasion.
You know, the resources in Kinney County and other counties along the border are beyond stretched thin. They've been broken. Our EMS is broken. We have a volunteer fire department. It's broken. Counties are broken. Communities are broken. People's lives are being devastated. Y'all deal with taxpayer funding dollars, which are some people here want to legislate not for their benefit. The taxpayers are the ones that fund this building, that pay for these tax dollars. Legislation should be implemented toward them. And I think this border crisis really simplifies down to a simple issue. When you don't enforce a law, people don't tend to follow it. And if we enforced our laws, our border would be secure, Americans would be safer, and many of the deaths that we've seen wouldn't have occurred. That's all I have to say on the subject.
No, I appreciate that. And the mention of the cartels, that's something I think a lot of people forget to mention. I've got a community that was in my district before redistricting, and Mendota, California, it was an issue with this little tiny community, could barely afford to even have an entire police department, and they were dealing with MS-13 and having to bring in state, local, and federal resources to try to combat some of these issues they were dealing with, and it is all related to what's going on the border, and it continues to add pressure on a lot of folks, but the fentanyl side of it is just one that really needs to be addressed, obviously, and I know there's a lot of concern there. But then also, I think some comments were made earlier by Mr. Beer that on the process of immigration, I mean, I come from a family of immigrants. My mom and dad immigrated here. And so obviously immigration is something that's very close to heart for me. But we have to have a process that works. And we have to have a process that allows those who want to come here legally go through that process and play and I think for the most part, a really good role in what our country is and has become is because people from all over the world see what we are and they want to be a part of that. But we have to have a process that works, and I think that would help relieve some of the pressure on the border. But the drug situation is just one that you can't overlook anymore, and the cost it's having in our local communities is just something that has to be addressed as quickly as possible. So thank you, Chairman. I yield back.